In this video, I want to show you a feature we haven't really looked at related to the Magic dashboard. You see, if you click the CRUD generator here, you have an SQL tab here. This basically allows you to write any arbitrary piece of SQL and automatically generate an HTTP endpoint wrapping that SQL. Before we actually start creating an endpoint, let's install the SQLite Chinook DB. Why? Because it contains a bunch of example SQL statements allowing us to play around with SQL. It contains stuff such as join, groups, aggregates, and a lot of them too. So this gives us some SQL to start out with, such that we can have some example SQL to wrap into our SQL HTTP endpoints. This takes a little bit of time because it's going to have to download like 2 megabytes of data, create a database, insert thousands of records into the database, etc., etc. However, when it's done, you have the Chinook DB, and you have a whole range of snippets in your SQL snippets collection. So and now it's done, so we can change to SQL Studio. We can change to our Chinook DB. See if we can find it, Chinook, here we go, and then we can click Alt-L to load script. You see everything starting with Chinook here is basically an example SQL script. If I load the first one here and I click F5, I get 25 records. Iron Maiden, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Metallica, U2, etc. Now actually we can go to the CRUD generator and we can choose the SQL pane here. We can choose database name, Chinook. We can choose record count as our secondary URL for this particular HTTP endpoint. We can choose authorization requirements, and we can click Alt-L to open up the snippets connection and simply load this particular script now. Then we can click generate, and we now have an HTTP endpoint. We can now go to endpoints. We can find record count, and we can invoke it. And as you can see, the endpoint returns the JSON result according to whatever SQL the SQL happens to be executing. Now, so we can keep on doing this. However, I want to show you another one, which I can find if I go to Tools, I go to SQL Studio, and let's try one of these other example things. I need to change my database to Chinook, of course. So here you can see 5 records. This one is not particularly good. Let's try to see if we can find some other. USA, blah, blah, blah. Yes, this one I guess is okay. Now we can use this script. Which script was it? Profitable countries. And we can create an SQL HTTP endpoint. We can name it choose the Chinook database. We can name it profitable dash countries, right? We can try to write it at least close to some same thing. Now we can apply arguments. Filter, type, string, add. Now, why is this important? Because when I load this thing now and I choose the profitable countries, I can actually parameterize the thing. If I now do after from invoice, then I write carriage return where, and then as actually we don't need an alias here, where billing country like, and then at. See this thing here? It's called filter. Remember how we parameterized the SQL statements in one of our previous videos where we looked at the data slots? Well, we can do the same thing here too. And now this HTTP endpoint will actually automatically have a filter argument that is of type string that we can reference inside of our SQL. So if we now generate this thing and we go to our endpoints and then we search for profitable countries and we invoke it, you will see this one actually takes an argument. Now we can write A%. For instance, invoke, and now we're only getting countries whose names starts with A. Now you can also, inside of the CRUD generator, when you are generating your SQL, let me just select Chinook DB and find it. You can also select the HTTP verb here. If I want to have a post HTTP endpoint, I can easily do that. If I want to have a put or a delete or a patch endpoint, I can also easily do this. Now, obviously, most importantly, this probably lends itself best, most rapidly, like insanely good to KPI. What's KPI? Key performance indicators. How do you typically display key performance indicators? Well, if we find our, what was the name of our endpoint? Modules, Chinook, record count. What's the name of it? Record count. Then, I mean, what you're looking at here is basically, for instance, a donut chart, right? Effectively, you have the name, you have the count. And actually, I want you to do this as an exercise. I want you to generate just like any type of front end, maybe wrapping it around, first of all, generate a CRUD API for your Chinook database, then create these two SQL endpoints that I created, and especially for this one called record count, I want you to, as an exercise, replace the landing page. What I mean by the landing page is this thing here that you see here, that main thing coming up here now, hopefully. I want you to replace this thing with a big donut chart, period, showing as key name value, as value the count, and then key name value here, value count, such that what you end up with is basically something looking like this. Except instead of showing modules complexity, it shows like how many records relatively does Iron Maiden have, how many does ACDC have, etc., such that you end up with something resembling this being shown on this page instead of the HTML text. Now, this requires that you A, generate a CRUD API wrapping your Chinook database, B, generate a front end afterwards that you download and you locally compile and you have it up running. C, create the SQL endpoint that we created, which we called record count here, right? And then you have the source for your HTTP endpoint, at which point you're going to have to go in and find the HTTP stash service.ts file in your front end locally on your own development machine. You're going to have to add an HTTP get service method. Then you're going to have to invoke that from the main landing page TypeScript file, the one that shows this HTML. And then you're going to have to figure out how to install a chart library in Angular. My suggestion is to use chart.js or some other Angular-based chart library. So when you have installed that, you can easily create the charts showing donut charts as you see fit. So anyways, that was an exercise for today. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.